Well, hello. Today is FearTalk15. I'm R. Michael Fisher. I'm here in Nanaimo, BC, the wonderful West Coast rainforest. Beautiful day today, frosty up in the mountain slopes, but down here it's birds picking on the lawn and it's green grass. And I know my co-host today, I'm going to call her co-host because we don't do interviews here on Fair Talk 15. We do conversations about conversations and we do all kinds of other things. But she is in a whole different place. Nicole, Bradford, Hartley, where are you?
I'm in Calgary.
Yeah,
Today here in Calgary, it was finally cold. It has been so mild up until the day before yesterday, and finally it got down into the double digits in the negatives. Brisk, bracing.
gotcha. I've been there. I'm a Calgary boy, as you know. Okay, so I like to open these, Nicole, with a little conversation. Sometimes it's a monologue, but I'm going to invite you to join me in the introduction today about, well, what is a fear talk? How might that be meaningful to people today? And what was my intention when I started this, I think 2.5 years ago? And you're number 15 on the list here. So it's obviously still going and still interests me. And then probably that's the most important thing. I know some viewers really enjoy these. So hang with us, folks, today. Here we go. Nicole and Michael. I think a fear talk really has that word talk in it. And I don't necessarily mean that to be absolutely literal. In some sense, it's as much a listening as it is a talking. That's obviously, to me, really important in good communication. But I was driven to start this series by a, both my research as an academic for plus being involved in communities of a lot of people and sort of always seeing that I call it the fear problem. Oh, there it is again. There we are again. And I just sort of thought, I don't think we have enough good conversations. And we could even call that dialogues. We'll explore maybe the difference between discussion, conversation, dialogue, etc. A little bit here. I didn't think we had good enough conversations and didn't have the platform often to talk about fear. And then often very quickly I found the discussions got into talking about fears.
Yeah.
You'd start with fear. Well, let's talk about fear itself. And then what ended up continually coming in are people's fears. And it seemed just driven the conversation continually. And of course, as a fear researcher, I spend most of my time, I'm not that interested in all the fears. There's tons of people writing about that, exploring it, researching it in all kinds of levels. And I didn't see that higher conversation about the fear pattern, the pattern of the pattern, the pattern of the pattern of the pattern. And I think that will also relate to why you and I are on today, and why I chose you is because you sent me a very interesting piece of dialogue you had with somebody in a conversation, and I would, if you would share that at some point appropriately. And it was about, well, we start here getting to know each other, and if I ask you a question, if I repeat it, then where do I go and what starts to change and what people respond to a particular question. And I think you're someone in my life, I've followed you as, and I'm calling you an experimenter. I was just writing notes. I said, she is experimental in relationship communication, community building, and vision, really, in a world that, really crunches down hard on us to be practical. So welcome, Nicole. If there's anything you'd like to add to what I just did on the intro around conversation, discussion, there's argument, of course, too, right? And then dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really interesting to me what you said about how when you start a conversation about fear, that then it so often slides into people sharing about the fears that they have. And I, I'm I have this suspicion, I have this suspicion that because because there's so few spaces in modern culture where we're allowed to feel fear, that I have this suspicion that, when you start talking about it, then suddenly it's like opens up this space like, oh, we're allowed to talk about fear here. And so I'm going to talk about my fears because there's nowhere else I can go to do that. And, yeah, my experimenting, like you were describing, like my experimenting has really got me to this place where what I notice I need most, and I'm starting to meet more and more people who are like, that's what I want too. And I need it in order to get different results in my life, is a space not just to talk about it, not just to feel it, but to really feel it, really process it. And oh my gosh, like there's so much territory that I never imagined even existed, even about 20 months ago, when I started to really dive into this realm of conscious feelings.
Conscious feelings. That's interesting. Great. So another thing about dialogue, as I understand in my studies, and there's many people, J. Krishnamurti, I think David Bohm did some of the early work on creating dialogue. And this is, I'm talking the 80s now, which dates me, 40 plus years ago kind of thing. And and one of the things I remember that I appealed to me, and it's kind of my philosopher self that it appeals to, is it wasn't definitely not just about content. And then even talking, have a discussion about fears, it tends to stay in a content focus for the most part, not totally, but it kind of keeps attention up there on the content of the fears, fear of XYZ. So that's part of what my exploring and inquiry was, and dialogue was, is to see if we can get below the content of the discussion, of the conflicts, for example. So dialogue was often brought into conflict work, international relations, those kinds of works. And I was watching and studying that too a bit. And the other idea about dialogue was the intention was about transformation. So there's something called transformative dialogue or transformative conflict work. And of course, I think that's probably the domain or an umbrella that would put you and I in probably somewhat of the same attraction. And that came down, there's many parts to it, but one part of that is that dialogue is, I don't want to say ultimately, but it has a burrowing quality. We ask ourselves to burrow.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you talked about process just in a moment ago. It's asking us to burrow down and start to pull up assumptions, really deep beliefs, value systems, sometimes not even in words, but they could be felt senses. They could be take the form of a need, for where we sort of are platforming ourselves or kind of learn to platform ourselves and then to come out into the world. And if our conversations are not burrowing down, and hopefully we do that together, that's part of the commitment of a dialogue process, we're there to actually uncover, recover, bring up to the surface in myself for awareness, and you as my partner in dialogue could point out what you see as some platforms I might be resting on, and vice versa. And so there was the real trust, the co-potential of a trusting relation, because we say we're probably operating on these foundations that are harming to some degree, not all, what we're actually attempting to get to. And if we call that nonviolent communication, if we call that living in peace and harmony, or whatever it may be. What do you think about that?
I love that you're talking about different kinds of speaking and listening.
Okay.
Mm, in the work that I do, I use distinctions and maps and tools and processes from this body of work called possibility management. And and really what all of this stuff comes from is years and years and years of experimenting with this question of like, okay, I did this way and I got these results, and I want different results. So what's it going to take? What's my next experiment going to be? And then do that. And and the distinctions, maps, processes, and tools are all discoveries that have come out of this experiential experimenting. And some of the distinctions are that there are these distinct kinds of speaking and listening. For example, there's one that's called neurotic speaking and neurotic listening, and this is just when I'm speaking for myself, and I'm just, I'm just, I'm having a verbiage feast on my own, and maybe there's someone watching or listening, and really I'm not speaking for them. I'm speaking for myself. And and I can be listening in the same mode, this neurotic listening, where I'm just listening to decide what I'm going to say. And it can bounce back and forth like that. And I'm not saying it's wrong or bad. It's just one kind of listening. And then there are other kinds of listening and speaking that are more about, adult listening and speaking, where we're here for each other, and we're here for
Maybe the
ourselves.
word is mature.
Yeah, there's a kind of a maturity to it. And then there are other kinds of mature ways of speaking and listening where it's about possibilities, or it's about discovery, or it might even be like what we call dragon speaking,
Okay.
where the person's really centered and grounded in what matters to them, and they are just rah, and that can be magnificent. So yeah, these various different kinds of speaking and listening that exist. I love that you're noticing about that.
Yeah, so let's go back to what you at one point called neurotic, expressing, listening, whatever that. I like to call it a template. We tend to use these communication templates, right, that we've picked up from the culture, we've picked up perhaps from parents, from schools, from all kinds of systems of what I'm going to frame, and because this is a fear talk, are fear-based patterns, or distress-based patterns, or trauma-based patterns.
Yeah,
And
and I would say that they're unconscious fear-based patterns. This is and earlier when we were talking about, before we turned on the video, this I said this thing about, in modern culture, the conversation about fear is over. Fear is wrong, fear is bad, fear means you're a coward, fear means that you can't be trusted because you're just going to probably freak out, or you're crazy and you blow things out of proportion. Like, fear means all these things in modern culture, but essentially all of them add up to, like, fear is wrong and bad, and if you have it, something's wrong with you.
in other words, you're not positive enough is another
Yep, that's one of the
attacks, really.
meanings that people make up
Yeah.
about fear. And again, one of the maps in possibility management is that this way of thinking about fear and this way of relating to fear, it's an old map, and it doesn't necessarily it has certain consequences.
Yeah.
It has the consequence where, yeah, people don't get to be honest and authentic about their fears, and then we don't even move on from there. We're just kind of stuck with them.
This is, I think, a great segue, if you don't mind, to your 3 questions, one of the tools that I think you've used, and you can give the context. I'm just going to give a little intro to it. This is what you sent me. I thought was fascinating, talking with the man. Probably could have been anybody, really, but perhaps it was important to be a man. You can clarify that. So it started when I shared, I'm working in a daycare center. I'm artist in residence. I'm doing some things with the kids in the room, kind of activities and some kind of teaching that I'm doing. And a young child, like 4 years old, at some point just peeps right through uh, all the chaos and the noise in this just really straightforward, non-emotional voice, but very cutting through the stuff of the action, and just said, "Artist, why are you here?" Okay, and I gave some kind of quick answer, not probably very conscious because I was so distracted by so many other things. But and then a couple of minutes later, "Artist, why are you here?" And then a third time, artist, why are you here? But the third time I again, sort of flustered. I'm always flustered when I get around 14 children, 3 to 5 year olds. By an hour, I'm like, okay, I think I've lost my quality attending and responding. And it's good that I just recognize that. And it probably does come from a deep fear. Somehow I just can't get control of this space. It's, 14 children, and we let them play in the daycare center. So they're play centric. And so they're not being constantly put in order. And so just trying as an adult walk into that, boy, it'll really bring up your control issues. And
Yeah.
am I going to really be heard? And am I going to be able to, guide them or whatever? As a teacher, it really challenges all that stuff too. But anyway, the idea of that third question, I responded in the end, I think I said, I just turned it back and said, why are you here? And I don't think that's a necessarily good or intelligent, brilliant response. I just thought it was like a desperation on my part when I reflect on it. But I wasn't mad at him. I just couldn't really handle it. I just didn't know where to go with it. And I think it was part of there's no social forum, for that existential question, why are you here? Like, why is he asking it 3 times? I'm obviously not answering it at the level of which it was intended to communicate with me through a question. So here we go, right? We weren't dialoguing. You see, we're trying to. I feel he was trying to get something out of me for a dialogue, but we just couldn't find the space in the classroom. I couldn't anyway. I don't think he could either. But anyway, that's what I said. And in the end, he said, oh, well, I'm here to have fun. And then I said, well, so am I. And it sort of ended that, kind of elegantly in a certain way. And then we just went off and played. But I shared that with you, or you read it, I think, in one of my blogs. And then you came back with a response. So if you could introduce what that triggered for you, these 3 questions that I was involved in a communication that I would say was okay, but not really satisfying.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what it triggered for me was it brought up this map that we use in possibility management. It's called the map of vacuum learning. And uh, there being two kinds of learning. One is pressure learning, where you're, pushing, 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 and the other is creating a vacuum. And one of the ways to create a vacuum is to ask a question just like that, and hold space for the response, and then ask it again, and then hold space for that response, and then ask it again. And it has the effect, and I've experimented with this question, has the effect of bringing people down into deeper layers. They're answering from different places in themselves. And the story I told you about was when I'd asked a male friend of mine, "What's it been like you for you? What's it been like for you to grow up as a boy, as a male, as a man in patriarchal capitalist modern culture?" And his first answer was pretty like, "Oh, to be honest, it's been pretty cool. I you know, I don't even remember exactly which order it went in, but eventually he came to this after the second time. He kind of got mad at me a little bit. He's like, kind of, I already told you, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And I
I
was like,
recognize that very much in what I would respond, especially
yeah,
20 years ago, I would have definitely been like that.
yeah. It's like, what, you didn't hear me the first time?
Yeah. What are you
And
looking for?
yeah, what are you trying to get out of me? And what I've learned is that there's this way of staying in contact with the person, to be like, yeah, it's kind of ruffling you for me to ask you this, but I really want to know. I
Okay.
really want to know what it's been like for you. I don't get to hear about this really.
So at
And
some level, you're entering fear territory here, a defense territory, a defended territory. You know that,
yeah,
right?
it's like the first layer comes from, again, to use possibility management distinctions, the box, the identity, the mental framework, the belief system, the personality. It's like, this is my first answer, is what my box would say.
Yeah.
The second answer comes from what we call the gremlin. And the gremlin is the alive part of our part of our survival mechanisms that defends our box. So this is like what are you asking me for? You know, why are you challenging me like this? And some gremlins, you know, are different. They have different strategies that they use to avoid changing or avoid going like into a more liquid feeling state.
So it could be very subtle, could be very passive, right? Rather than what we were demonstrating as maybe a more assertive or aggressive,
Yeah.
a more flight response in that sense. What we talk
Yeah.
as a fear flight rather than a fear assertion.
Yeah.
Um, could also be a freeze.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you can really like stay in contact with the person and really then get into the next layer, I find that this is where people start to feel and open up. And and this friend of mine was like, actually it's really fucking hard that, you know, to be the gender who's supposed to uphold the system. I'm supposed to be like the dude, the guy that, you know, knows what he's doing and produces all these results and takes care of all this stuff. And yet inside he talked about how he was constantly like not measuring up in his own mind, and had all these inner battles going on that he had only really started to be able to talk to other people about.
I'm actually going to read the text that you sent. I actually feel as a male that I actually want to read it. And I think it will have a different feel than what your explanation was
Oh,
on
good.
your side,
Yeah.
in the sense, your side. Uh, so I asked a friend what it's been like for him to be a man in a modern culture. And his first answer was something like, quote, honestly, great. I've had so many privileges. The world's been my oyster. I've been so lucky, end quote. You respond, but what has it really been like for you? Quote response, fine, really, great, exclamation marks. Well, sometimes hard because of all the hate toward men and having to do the dance around all the politically correct stuff. There's been so many expectations to meet, end quote. Okay, dude, but really, I really want to know, how has it really been for you to be a man in modern culture? So just notice content being left, listened to, and then the attention going not on the content, staying with the tool, right? The burrow. Third, he started to cry. He said he was always been so busy being a man that he doesn't even know who he really is. And I think for you, as for me, it's extraordinary that we are not able to just answer a question about what it's like being something, or artist, why are you here? Whatever the questioning is, with is coming with as good of intention as possible for the most part. I mean, we know that people ask questions as part of an attack system, but this, we're not talking about that here. So I used the word extraordinary. I was so taken, just, I mean, I know this, like I know like the back of my hand, having been there. I've even used that process somewhat a little bit in some of the clients I've had, and when I've worked as a therapist. With youth, I've used a bit of that kind of burrowing attention that stays with them, and I often would do it through art therapy modes where they got to draw it rather than try to explain it, which they really can't stand most of the time explaining that to an adult. So I did use a lot of art, but, and I'd say, you know, could we just go over that section again? You know, I heard you say this, this, and this, but could we go back to that piece? And so we focus on it again. See, not letting the content, I want to know what's underneath that template, you know. So that's where I got my most rich experiences with some of this burrowing technique, which you now called a learning technique. You know, you use possibility management. I keep thinking, well, yeah, it's possibilities of learning, possibilities of learning. That's where I come from as an educator. I'm interested, how can we frame virtually everything under learning?
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, that could be really distressing for people who have been so hurt by learning systems
Yes.
in the workplace, in the home, that came under authoritarian regimes of punishment, control, reward, and diminishment of that deeper level of self. So, but I just want to remark, go back to you, amazing and extraordinary, extraordinary for me still to listen to that.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine what becomes possible when more of those kinds of conversations can happen. And and to land in that place of discovery for myself, when it's me who gets to go down through the layers and to find something that's been like tickling or pushing or bubbling from underneath, and to actually be able to get to it and see it clearly and speak it and have it like be held, instead of going into another kind of speaking, which would be like, mm, in possibility management, we talk about roadblocks, these things that we say that kind of kill the conversation or kill the space. And to just have it be able to float in the air and echo a bit. And then what? Wow, once I've discovered this thing that's new about myself, that's all, like you said, it's the back of my hand, but I haven't really ever looked at it, let alone said it in the presence of somebody else.
And then I'm interested that what you're, we kind of use this language, you and I I come out of this tradition too, of kind of the self-development, self-exploration, inquiry, coming out of the 70s and so on. And what I'm coming to more and more is realize a relational paradigm to all this. Now, obviously, in this, what you've just shared in this tool, it's a relational approach to an unveiling with, the classic therapeutic relationship, etc. And then it, to me, also comes to a place where both listener and revealer, in a sense, in this, or the answerer, are actually in a co-play. There's actually a co-editing even, and a co-coding. So I'm just throwing things out here. In other words, it isn't actually about me discovering myself or my essence only. I'm not saying it isn't about some of that. But in a relational paradigm, the whole nuancing of the actual process of revealing is absolutely dependent, almost, it seems, on the co-relational social self, the communal self, which I think gets us out of that, I need to go find myself, I need to go search for my, get a therapist to help me find myself, etc. That actually what I'm trying to work with here in Fear Talks is, I think in having a certain kind of conversation about fear, we will actually find a sense of how we both collude, are in commission with a coding against ourselves, selfness. That third level, you can see to the first level of that man's response. And I go, why are we coded not to be real, true? Of course, I could answer that intellectually and analytically, but it's still profoundly amazing to me. We're still coded. In other words, his talk, the first time through, is coded for you to play and be in his code and play out the code. And there might be rewards if you did that, Nicole, in a certain situation, if it's your boss or somebody who has a lot of power relative to yourself in a certain structural formation, or a danger of perhaps injury if you did break the code or push the code. This is huge. I mean, talk about fear patterning right at the code level, right? The coding of language.
Yeah.
And I know language is so important. As I've heard you speak at different times, it certainly is for me. Um, yeah, feel free to just jump in.
Yeah, that it brings me back to what I was saying about this modern culture's map of of fear and of also anger, sadness, and joy. Incidentally, these four core feelings that we all have that when they mix and blend, they make up all the other, rainbow of feelings. But this old map that says fear is bad and wrong and not okay is, stands in quite a contrast to the new map of fear that we use in possibility management conscious feelings work, where fear is fear. Fear is a, a neutral source of information and energy that we can use for our lives, for handling our lives. This is very different from what fear is on the old map. This is fear on the old map. The conversation's over. Don't be scared. And on the new map, the question is more like, what do you feel scared about? And do you feel fear? How much fear? How high of an intensity of fear? Is it fear about the here and now, or is it an emotional fear about the past that you felt over and over and over because you never did get a space to complete that fear and process it and get the information from it? And this territory just becomes like massive. And of course, fear itself is usually in the present, is about the unknown. So this is what I like. This just jazzes me up so much to go into this territory of fear, practically speaking too, like by putting myself on my edge of what I am comfortable about and really like lean into what else is possible. And even to sometimes speak without knowing what I'm going to say, and let alone like ask a question where I have no idea how the person is going to react or respond, and to use my fear while I'm doing it consciously to take care and to pay attention and to discern this from that, and to really like come alive and do something extraordinary, like live out something extraordinary.
I'm going to try this question with a little different route. If we were to do this 3-question process, I'm just thinking, could I add a route that might make this questioning process interesting or have a different possibility? So I'm just gonna fake this through.
Cool. Go.
So your question was something like, what is it like to be, let's just say, simplify it, what is it like to be a man in today's modern world? Okay. So the encouragement I'm going to just start with is, I want you to answer this and trip over your own words as you answer it.
Okay.
And I'll be there to hold you, be with you as you trip. It's very interesting. I'm trying to think of a way, because you said something about, what if I start talking and saying things when I don't even know what I'm going to say next? So you see, if you have that as an invitation from an inquirer who's inquiring into you, what if this was your intimate partner, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
could just imagine. I mean, I would love someone to say that to me, my intimate partner. So that's what came up, was a phrase, something like that. You see, I'm not asking you to answer the question as much as I'm asking you to risk however you answer it, but I want to invite you to trip over your own words answering it. And then we might go to the 3 levels. But if that was actually the lead right at the beginning
Yeah.
of the tool, would that shift something? So I see you're kind of brightening up there. So
Yeah, I love all of these. Today I was in a training space. I'm training to the next level as a possibility coach.
okay.
And one of the prompts that we worked with today is to find the next question that shifts the shared space of the coach and the client into something new and extraordinary,
Right.
and where discovery becomes more, is possible, where transformation is possible.
Nice. Nice. I love it.
And so this is kind of what happened in my dyad with my partner,
Okay.
because we were also asking each other's questions in order to kind of spark the next question. It was so cool, and there was very much like, I'm just gonna start talking. I don't know what I'm gonna say,
Mhm.
and this is gonna be another way to phrase it: is say, feel free to start talking before you know what you're gonna say.
Yeah.
Just
That's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes provide a stem, like a sentence stem that's
Sure.
just like, here's your diving board or your launch pad.
Yeah. So you see using these different imageries, right? Different languaging. It could be a different image that we keep providing ourselves as we enter what still seems to be a particular inquiry, but we can keep changing the metaphors and the imagery. And that's what I call expanding the imaginary
Yeah.
around the content. So around fear, let's just say, right? My relationship to fear, the world's relationship to fear, the community's relationship to fear, and how can I keep expanding the imaginary so we don't settle in various imaginaries you started off talking about, the conversation's over within a particular imaginary of fear. So I'm even now, you can hear it, I'm a big on language as a scholar. I'm always creating a new dictionary for having a conversation about fear, to be simple. And so, I can, pull out 50 terms now to talk about fear that continually expands the imaginary, and we don't have to settle, and they're not ones that come out of the dictionary encyclopedia of medicine, psychiatry, and psychology. Not saying those aren't important, not useful. I'm just saying we're dead in the water. I'm kind of being blunt. We're
Yeah.
dead in the water if we continue to use those templates, if with the vocabulary that they've offered us, that the society offers it, that those disciplines offices, those professions offer us, and we end up anchoring and trying to rely on them to crawl out, or the mess that we're in, and this, I call it the fear matrix that we're in, the fear-based patterning of distress, trauma, oppression, patriarchy, pathological patriarchy, and so on. So fear imaginary just itself, the combination of terms, I think it has a certain potentiality, um, for anybody. Instead of talking about your fears, although you may, okay, well, let's just explore our fear imaginary today. Interesting way to intervene into the fear complex
Yeah.
through a very simple set of even just two-word languages, putting two words together, which is another imagery. um, Image, imaginary, imagination. And so now we're really in that domain of the what I call the irrational,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? We've just kind of slipped out of that rational controlling discourse formation, which the man probably was answering pretty rationally about how the world is and his relationship to it. But ultimately we're dissolving the rational paradigm into a more irrational paradigm. And then through the irrational, I have always suggested, this is just my little bit of theory from my experiences, the irrational will now have a different playground than the irrational trying to play in the rational camp.
Mm.
That is generally not that useful. They are so opposing, so gapped, so abyssed from each other, rational to the irrational. We need that mediation through the imaginary, the intuitive, the imagery, the metaphors, right? The reconstruction. So just call that the irrational. It's not about the rational or the irrational in the sense it just seems to have a, and that's why I used art therapeutic approaches so often, um, for some of that. But there's many other ways to do that through the body, somatics, right? And so on.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a juicy, like, I would call it like the realm of the non-linear, where it's not necessarily chaos. it might be. It's but it's not the kind of the same old order that is so familiar, so common. So yeah, it's the realm of the extraordinary where anything is possible, where something completely different is possible.
Yeah, I even will sometimes, I talk as because I'm a visual artist as well, performative artist. I talk in terms of aesthetics. Sometimes we have to enter an aesthetic domain, and it's a great to do that through relationship, co-relationship, because arguably in developmental psychology and other things, some of the great findings have been is that we do understand quite a lot about the mother-child connection.
Mm.
Perinatal, sometimes it's another caregiver, it doesn't necessarily be the mother, but usually it is. And so that perinatal environment, even prenatal, is a very aesthetic based system. That child does not have rational, linear, logical equipment. So that's not how they're processing you. And what's interesting is they change the mother just as much as the mother changes them in that co-potential possible possibility relation. So that's where you hear my feminist matrixial mother based. We all come from the source, and our fundamental relational aesthetic is very learnable and relearnable, and we need to reclaim that. So do you find in your work, I mean, you're talking about offering attention, right? Whether you're a coach, therapist, and so on, even in community, conscious community group settings, this attention, this aesthetic. And I know you're a mother yourself. Do you feel your work is informed by that in ways that you're aware of and so on?
It's becoming ever more clear to me that the education that I got so that I could do this space holding work, especially as a space holder who's not like an authority over the person I'm holding space for, where it is a collaboration. Uh, I learn just as much from holding space as the person learns from having the space held. But motherhood was my education, in where I was holding space for life to emerge and mature and thrive. And the the feedback I got from my kids, when they, wouldn't talk to me, or when they wouldn't listen to me, mm, or they wouldn't kind of conduct themselves in the ways that were that I was hoping they would. Every mother wants her child to eat good, nourishing food, and starts to freak out when the story arises in her own mind that something's off about how the child's eating. So, in these very everyday, all day, every day, triggering, you have sleep deprivation coming in there that really, it's like, really enriches the field in some strange ways. So, there's more sensitivity. This was my training, and I'm going through this process right now, working towards a mother graduation celebration.
Mhm.
And this will be what I mean. I became a mother when I was 20, and because I wanted to be with my child and not just hand them off to a caregiver who I would have to pay. I mean, I just, that's not what I wanted. I kind of unconsciously chose, but there were moments of very, very lucid moments where I was like, this is what I want. I want to be with my child. I didn't bring him into the world to send him off to somewhere else. And I think this was because he was changing me. That was so evident and so beautiful to me and so fulfilling for me that I wanted to stay in this day to day unfolding process with him as the space holder, because I'm older and I have more experience to go with. That kind of qualified me. And yet the wisdom that first my eldest son, and then the three children that came after him, the wisdom that unfolded as they as I held space for them to discover themselves and to reveal themselves and to learn about the world around them and report about their learning. This was magic to me. And and it seems to have meant that going into the realm of possibility management, learning to be a space holder, a possibility coach, a person who holds space for emotional healing processes and transformation, motherhood has been
Yeah.
absolutely my learning ground.
And as a male, in body anyway, that I am, I certainly have an identity sensibility far beyond that of my gender. However, that is something of another interesting journey of how a male-bodied figuration of a being has to negotiate the holding space, this embracing space, this creative potential space in co-potentiality, instead of what we tend to learn is not so much what we learn from our mom, but we're learning from a patriarchal culture, which is a substitute great father God image archetype, etc. And usually things are clear cut, and this is how it should be done. And keep control as a man, and then you'll have it all together, and you'll get everything you need in this culture, buddy. Anyway, we could go. Our time is running out, and I want to just share that an observation's coming as I watch the time tick down. That I want to pass it by you. We came to Fear Talk together. This is a little bit of poetics here on the spot. I have no idea where it's going. You can help me. We came to Fear Talk on the teeter totter. You at one end, me at the other. We walked across to the center of the board, that wonderful balancing act of working together to keep it in balance off the ground, but knowing that we would return to the ground because that's where we came from. But now we're on the teeter totter, and we decide at one point, let's switch sides. And we have to, get real close in the center of the teeter totter and negotiate our bodies, taking the steps still to keep the teeter totter balance. And then we go off to our ends, back to where we are now in that transformative movement. That's the dialectic. That to me is the beauty of the transformative dialectic and the cooperation we're speaking. And then we sit on the teeter totter, and I say to you on the other side that you, where I started, I say to you, Nicole, we talked about fear for 45 minutes, and we never used the word love in this entire video. I just want to point that out. Nicole, over to you. Last words, etc.
Yeah, I just there's this sense of when you landed that, when you said that, we didn't use the word love. And there's this part of me that's like, because that's what we were talking about all along. And to use the word love instead of to use all the other words that add up to, or that are facets of it, we would kind of like bring the focus into this is love over here only. And this is so magical to me, because in my experiments with fear, the space that opens up when fear is welcome and fear is used as information, as energy, has so much more room in it for love than when fear's related to from the place of this old map, where when, if I say, oh, I feel scared, and someone's like, oh no, like, that just, as compared to when I say I feel scared and someone goes, oh, because, and I can be like, it's really my heart speaking. And and then and then what comes into this space is this information, and it mm, the love that can happen in a space where fear is welcome instead of feared is is really what I'm after, and it is all about love.
And I will say it's about another path to love.
Yeah. And I would say that it's not even a destination love. It's like what happens when it's not being blocked. So expanding the space so that there's more room for love to come through, because that's what will happen. Yeah.
And I use a word to try to capture, I think, what you just said. It's called fearlessness.
It might even be fearfulness, alive with fear. Yeah.
Fear is always in the word fearlessness. That's why I like it better than love.
Yeah.
You never take the fear word out. I used to get, when I started the In Search of Fearlessness project and community in Calgary, that was one of the critiques I got from the human potential movement, the new age spiritual movement. You're never going to get anywhere that's too negative. You just need to have, why isn't it In Search of Love? I said, because when people keep using love all the time, they forget to study fear, because the word fear is no longer there. Love tends to just blow the room open. And then we're caught in all kinds of moralistic ideas that we should be loving because our God is loving. And why aren't you one with God? And we could just go on and on with this very interesting imaginary of love versus fear. Well, thank you today, Nicole. We did not get trapped, I shall say, in the love versus fear controversy, even though it's an interesting controversy for what it is. Thank you for going other places.
Yeah.
Enjoyed this today.
Thank you for inviting me, and
Yeah.
I'm sad it's over.
Yeah. And I'll put a link below to some of Nicole's work and how you can get to know her and her work more as well. So hope to put this up soon on the YouTube. Thanks very much, Nicole.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.